you can see that the champions are not just in the NGO world, champions are within ministers, within government officials. I spend a lot of time working in the NGO world and always complaining about government and not doing enough and not listening. And in the last 7.5 years as a Chief Victims Advisor, I have worked alongside so many champions who are pushing and pushing internally. Their heart is with us, is trying to make change, and they give 200%. So I'm just so grateful to everyone is pulling in the same direction at the moment. There's a question here. There's many questions. There's one big one. It's, what do you see as the biggest barrier to progress?
Kia ora koutou, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Look, I've only just arrived in the last hour and already my head is spinning from what I'm hearing, and we had a bit of a hui and a get together just before coming into the room, and just thank you for the input into today because it is just so important. The biggest barrier from my perspective, and I'm going to talk from education here, is that first of all, I'll talk about the biggest opportunity because we were just talking about that, but the opportunity is that we're not sitting isolated. We're not sitting as isolated as education and what we were doing in the past and working on what we thought was going to make the big difference. We're now working with a whole lot of agencies around where we can be pushing into and where we can be making the difference. But the biggest barrier is that how do you get all of that great work that is happening out there? Because I'll guarantee that a lot of people in this room don't know, and I'll talk about this a bit later, but don't know of everything that's happening within the education space and what we're doing as a team and all officials and right from minister right through to teachers on the ground to ensure that we're changing our practices to make certain that we're making positive change to ensure lifelong changes for the young people that are in front of us every single day. And I really struggle with the fact that even though we're working together, we're still really siloed. So it's how do we break down that barrier of the silos to ensure that those changes are as effective as what they can be. So I do see that as the biggest barrier around the silos still existing. And anyone that knows and has worked, and all of you have worked with government departments, know that those silos have been historical. But I can also guarantee to you that watching this work, and I want to commend you, Minister, on the work that you're doing, your passion about breaking that down and Emma's passion about breaking that down is absolutely right to the fore. And no one can doubt that, but it's going to take a wee while. And that's the barrier that I feel we face.
Can I pick up from there? I know what the one is, and that follows exactly on from Minister Tinetti. I think at this point, so I've seen some of the questions, how are our people working together? Minister Tinetti has just acknowledged, yes, we have Te Puna Aonui, literally bringing board CEs and agencies together and collectively agreeing to share responsibility for eliminating violence, yes. We have myself, who also brings ministers together with our officials to also collectively agree on a shared responsibility for ending violence, yes. I have one-on-ones with the ministers periodically and also individually with CEs and agencies, yes. So that in itself has been a change. What I also know directly from you is it's still not filtering down to our whānau on the ground, that our whānau are still having to navigate the spaghetti lines of government. And so that is the hard, unstuck bit that I keep going on about. And so yes, that is the biggest barrier for me, is hearing that providers who just want to do the mahi, who don't want to have to operate in tight, confined contracts, who just want to be trusted, that they know what to do and want to be able to give whatever support is needed. And that traditionally our contracts and the way we commission work That has not been authentic partnership. And so many of you used that today. Imogen, Danielle, so many, nearly all of you, talked about authentic partnership. We are starting to see good pockets of it, yes. Now, not without the pushing of people, of ministers, of officials, of CEs, not without the and regional public service commissioners and our agencies on the ground in communities who themselves are pulling their hair out and going, oh, we just want to be able to help these community providers do their mahi. So we are starting to see some of that in pockets. It's nowhere near scaled up to the point that our whānau deserve. And I guess in light of everything that, yep, we've started some good stuff, it's still not where we want it to be. And on that, this is something that many of you will have heard me say. Because often I'll get up with government is the slowest place to make change, I tell you. And so often that can be a real honest to goodness drag as a politician, to feel like it feels like 5,000 hui to one little policy change. That's what it can feel like. And you can often think, oh, is it worth it? And how I've had to come to terms with that myself is, yes, it's worth it, because making change over a generation, over the next 25 years, to aim to eliminate violence is far better than letting things continue as they are and facing another 200 years of violence. Yeah. And that helps me to go to bed and try and get some sleep each night. When I know, yeah, it's not going to happen tomorrow, but at least we are acknowledging and being far more honest than we ever have been, and committing to the actual shifts. And all of those shifts, they come back to a devolution of power, mana motuhake, and authority to communities, but not neglecting communities to do this work on their own. And so I wanted to talk about the barrier in terms of properly affirming the power of communities to do that work. There are some deep, decades-old legal liabilities that are really challenging, procurement processes that are really challenging, and that seems to be it's like drilling through rock, if I'm quite honest. It's like trying to get a tunnel through, and it's like drilling through rock. But honest to goodness, every single day we are trying to change this, and I do acknowledge and appreciate the ongoing community challenge that gives us the mandate to keep pushing. Kia ora.
Yeah.
Tinetti, there's a question here for you. Would the Ministry of Education consider mandating a healthy relationship syllabus across the entire education sector?
Okay, so I think to start with, I want to start with the early childhood area, because when people talk about the whole of the education sector, they often start thinking about schooling, but research shows that this has to start at our early learning is critically important. And the work that we've done over the past 2 years around trialling social and emotional learning programs and how that impacts into this area has been critical. And we know that with the programs that we have trialled and the results that they have shown is that they will make a big difference. So just recently, my colleague, Minister Luxton, announced that we were now putting those out into 75% of centres, early childhood centres. That's the Engage program that has been developed based on the Dunedin Growing Up in New Zealand study. So we're starting to roll that out, and we will look at gathering further information in that area. We know that that will make a difference in regulating young people. Then since 2020, we at that time launched the Relationships and Sexuality Education Guidelines. And over the past 3 years since we released those, we've been slowly putting resources out into schools to ensure that they can have those guidelines and make sure that they are implementing those guidelines as best they can be. In fact, when I launched some of those resources here in one of the Wellington secondary schools, I got a lot of positive feedback about how amazing those guidelines are. But I recognise the fact that in the curriculum itself, even though it is mandatory to be teaching this way, that there's a lot of flexibility for schools in what they are teaching, because the health curriculum is one of the areas that you can go out to, or is the only area that you can go out to your board of trustees, out to your community and work out what it is that you're going to teach within that area in the school, and schools do that with their communities. So in 2024, we are refreshing the curriculum, the health and wellbeing curriculum. I've already signalled, well and truly signalled, that I want to have a nationwide conversation around this. I want to have a conversation about the likes of compulsory consent education. I think we need to have this conversation. I think it is long overdue, and I know it will be a bit contentious, but I think that I'm looking forward to it. And the short answer is yes, we will look at it, but we need to bring the community on board as to why we need to do this. I keep getting pushed all the time by young people on this one, and I agree with them. And their voice needs to be well and truly a big part of this conversation as well. They are already telling us, we've already seen the surveys that have been done throughout the country, particularly at girls' schools, but it's not just girls' schools, it's across the board, and they are pushing that this needs to happen. Every time I have a meeting with my advisory group or with young people, they bring this up as a key area that must be addressed. So that is why I've signalled that next year when we go into that refresh, this will be part of the conversation.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm going to ask you a question about if you had the magic wand.
Ooh.
If you had the magic wand, what was the 3 things that you would like to prioritise and achieve?
We saw I should not call it a magic wand, but we saw quick action when we were locked down and when COVID hit us as Aotearoa, and we saw government move incredibly quickly to lean on community agencies to do the mahi. They realised that the community agencies had the relationships and the networks that central government simply just does not have. And suddenly, very quickly, we saw high trust, relational, flexible ways of working and funding and resource. For me, that would make one of the biggest differences for the mahi in ending violence and affirming the power of community. So that's one thing. The role, and I'm here to support Jan Tinetti and to encourage our mandate collectively to give the Minister that ability to be able to push through in the space of education and the opportunity that education offers us in prevention. The opportunity, the intergenerational opportunity that education in the prevention space offers us, for me, would be one of the next big, massive impacts. In terms of our generational attitudes around violence and power over. And then finally, it's workforce. I talked this morning, we last year started rolling out the workforce tools to be able to improve practice for whānau on the ground. And it has started with police, and corrections and the Ministry of Justice. I would love our workforce capacity, our workforce in general, to just overnight be built. That would be, and we value them. We heard some of that on the panel. We understand the incredible value that a strong, supported workforce has in the role of preventing violence. So those would be 3 of my top things.
Would you like to have
Go on, Emma. Go on, Emma.
Really important. If I could wave a magic wand, I think I'd walk around Wellington and I would ding on each of the agencies and turn them into prevention agencies. So I would turn Arapatama into the prevention of going to jail agency, and I would turn MSD into the prevention of being off work agency, and I would orient each of our agencies just a bit so that everything they were doing from the top to the bottom had something to do with preventing the thing that they're there to pick up at the other end.
Love it.
That's what I would do. I would look at the criteria that currently separates who gets what and who's allowed to do what and what good looks like. I think we're inhibiting innovation every single day by limiting the amount of evidence we need in order to invest, in order to scale. We are not getting enough good stuff happening because we're sort of a bit cautious about what might happen if it doesn't quite work out. And so we need to be able to sort of create different risk tolerances around that. And then the last thing I would do is that every single one of us here, and including my people at Te Puna Aonui, we would stop for a day and we would just rest and restore and build ourselves into slightly better than, because it's been a really hell of a last few years for lots of folks. And I think we would just try and build up a bit more resilience and a bit more restoration and support one another to go again.
Me too. I think that many of the answers lie within the people in this room and people like you that haven't made it to this room today. And I think that lifting your voices and lifting people to be, and I don't just mean within government, I mean even media, even people that sit outside of the space, understanding the level of expertise and how the answers that we need in this space are already there, and we just need to value the people who work there and listen and take on board what they are saying to us, and I don't think that happens enough. In the education space, for our educators to be able to do the wonderful job in this space, I would love to be able to give them the space to be able to do that, to take it all on board. Like, I know that our educators are just so busy and so crammed with everything that they do that sometimes they can't see the wood for the trees, and that's no disrespect to them. That is because there are so many priorities, but there don't need to be that number of priorities. We need to be able to give them that space to be able to breathe and to be able to see the importance of this work. And also, I was actually, funny, just before Emma spoke, I was thinking one of the key and critical areas that I would like to be able to do is that we often are fighting fires and being reactive all the time. I wish that we could lift our eyes a bit further into that preventative space and be at the top of the cliff rather than at the bottom of the cliff, always having to be that reactive self all the time. I want us to get up there and not be down here having to be that one that's always having to react.
There's a question on here about the family court, and I'd like to acknowledge that we don't have all our ministers here today, and the ministers would like to be here. And I'm particularly thinking of Minister Allen, the Minister of Justice. And I just want to say how impressed I've been when the minister came in. She said, I want a more victim-centric system. And as I said before, I've been in this role for 7.5 years, produced about 15 reports. And suddenly, with a minister pushing from the inside, there are probably about 80 or 90 government officials now that are working on improving the criminal justice system for victim survivors, and that includes the family court. So I just wanted to, that question was there. I just wanted to acknowledge that mahi. Sorry.
Can I jump in on that?
Absolutely.
As well? Just to assure people, the whole area of justice, but particularly in the courts and family courts, is raised to me pretty much every day, definitely every week. And so that is an ongoing priority conversation, particularly with Minister Allen and myself. And so just to make sure that people know, because I acknowledge in today's hui, my goodness, not all of the issues in the work have been covered, not by a long shot, not by a long shot. We'll need a 5-day hui. So just want to acknowledge that. But absolutely, the big moves needed to stop harming people through family court processes are right on the radar, and we absolutely, because I want to hold that space. It's not about saying, yeah, we're doing it. It's actually about saying, affirming that Te Aorerekura is having a purpose in actually even starting the work in a proper way. And Minister Allen, yes, absolutely, has made a genuine difference in actually recognising that that work needs to happen in a proper way. It's not yet impacting on whānau and people in those court processes, not yet, not fully, but just really want to hold people's hope so that we don't throw it all away and think that, oh, this whole thing is a waste of momo wā, because things are starting and that we have to keep going with it. It requires patience that you've had to hold for decades, and it requires being hoha for a bit longer as well, that it hasn't been done yet. And I share exactly that same hoha and frustration. But together we can try and keep each other's hope alive to keep going.
I'd like to, the hui today is all about us learning together. And we heard so much today. I'm sure we achieved our goal that we have all learnt together today. There's something each of us has learned. And I wondered, our wonderful panel, if you would like to reflect on things that you learnt today that will help you in your mahi.
Oh, okay, I'm getting the stares from... I have been here all day, and that's fair enough. There are so many things I've learnt today. What I thought would be most appropriate is how many groups and communities have been invisibilised for generations, for decades and decades. And rather than going through all of you, I acknowledged all the different voices we've heard today, but I will settle as one of my last words on the voices of mokopuna that we heard today. I want to acknowledge Noel and the whakaaro about the use of the word mokopuna. Mm-hmm. For me, that is appropriate for so many reasons, and if we are going to use these kupu, we have to understand the depth of them. And mokopuna for me invokes a responsibility, an intergenerational responsibility. And when Noel was describing the choice, the proactive choice to use mokopuna, I thought about my dad. And one day we were at home in Hokianga, and some of the neighbours' kids came running around from next door. They were at our house as we came home. He was delighted. Little paku, 3 of them. Little blonde, Pākehā, blonde, blue-eyed, green-eyed, tauiwi, fair-skinned, running around in our backyard. And my father hops out of the car and he goes, oh, look, we've got some mokopuna here. Now that's his word for anybody's child. Since he's become a grandfather, and his oldest moko is my daughter, who is 30, since he's become a grandfather, that's how he refers to our collective children now. That's the word that he thinks is most appropriate. Why? Because we have a collective shared responsibility to keep the wellspring healthy. I love how Noel said that today. And so when those voices were heard, when we had the beautiful artwork and then their voices, their words, their stories being reflected at us, I had a moment. One of the moments was, do you know, to steel yourself in this environment of politics, to be a minister, to be women in politics, and to be a Māori woman in politics requires a steel and a grit. And that can be quite hardening if we're not careful. It right? Yeah. It requires us to think that we have to almost not be as human as we actually are. And when I heard those mokopuna and their voices and their stories, my body wanted to be human and it wanted to react humanly. And so I had tears and shivering and emotion. And I felt vulnerable because mostly, the expectation is that we are not supposed to show. As women in politics, as a Māori woman in politics, as a leader in politics, we are coerced into thinking that the only way we are going to survive the constant attack is by letting a whole lot of our humanity go. And so having a human response to their challenge to us today is something that I am going to take with me for all of this work, for all of my life. Also made me miss my whānau and my tamariki and my little mokopuna as well. But to hear their words, I don't know if I even have the words that will properly justify what I learnt. I learnt eons worth of knowledge in those minutes. I learnt how scandalous and unacceptable it is that we continue to have harmful practice, and how courageable and determined we have to be to stop that as soon as possible, and how all the bits of our work that we are doing, if they just focus on that and that alone, we know it will impact all of the rest of us groups who have had far too much of having power done over them. So I just really want to mihi to our mokopuna and tamariki.
Sure. We are coming to the end of our panel. So I'd like to offer each of you an opportunity for just a moment of reflection.
I feel like I've
for
said
today.
mine. I feel
Emma,
like I've said
I'll start
mine.
with Emma.
I think one of the things that I was reflecting on, and something that I've certainly learned today, is that when you are so deep in it, and every day you're grinding away, you're doing what's right in front of you, we're often at the pointy end of the intersection of so many different things that you're trying to juggle and to make happen in this space and in this sector, is that we can really lose sight of the basics. And what I learned today is that in some spaces we are not doing the basics well enough. We are not educating the public. We are not reminding and speaking into the size and scale of the problem that we've all just absorbed somehow, that's just the space that we're in. And I think Ta Mark's kōrero with us earlier today really kind of hit that home. And even to the point of hearing from Ants about the struggles, the daily challenge, that is so invisible that we are not doing the basics well enough. And so that's something that I want to take from today, is that we check ourselves, that in our ambition to be bigger and do more and all of that, that we are not leaving behind the core things that need to be just fundamental in everybody's lives to make them safe and well. So that's what I'll be taking away today.
And I think for me, actually, it was Emma, it was something that you said earlier in this panel discussion. And remember, I'd only just come in, so I haven't had the benefit of seeing the whole day. And I'm looking forward to getting that rundown from my officials here as well. But you said the guarantee that there'll be people out there who don't know that there is a strategy called Te Aorerekura. And actually I met one of those people not that long ago, who's a general manager of a community centre in an area where they do work a lot in this space, and had never heard of this strategy before. And you said that should light the fire in our bellies. And from my reflection, you just put it into words. It has to light the fire in our bellies. We have to make certain that people are engaging, that people understand, and that people are using this to create a better world. Otherwise, what is the point? So that's what I'm taking away from today.
Would you like anything? So it just comes to me to thank all of you. Thank you for your mahi. Thank you for your endless pushing of government. Thank you for partnering, working with government, speaking for the voices that are invisible and need to be elevated. We are all working for our tamariki, for our mokopuna, and thank you to all of the leadership here in this room, across the country. Thank you to everyone who's pulling together. Ngā mihi.